The harsh hum of the Vothrak warship above seemed to pierce the very air, its metallic presence a constant reminder of the alien invaders' unrelenting power. But for Sarah and her Ragdig team, the immediate concern was survival. The underground entrance loomed before them, a final sanctuary, a place where, for the moment, the Vothrak couldn't reach. It was a fragile hope in a world quickly falling apart. Move, move, move. Sarah barked, urgency in her voice as she pushed Marquez ahead of her. The remnants of their squad scrambled down the dark, narrow steps leading into the tunnels beneath the city, the echo of their boots on the cracked stone, the only sound that filled the silence of the apocalypse. Once inside, they paused only long enough to catch their breath. The darkness of the tunnel swallowed them, and for a moment, Sarah felt a sense of eerie calm, an unnatural stillness after the chaos they had just escaped. It was hard to believe the city they had known, the streets she had once walked as a child, were now burning ruins, consumed by an unstoppable alien force. "How long do we have?" Marquez asked, her voice low and tense. She was staring down at her rifle, checking it for damage. "Not long," Sarah replied, glancing at the others. Her squad had survived, but barely. Every one of them was covered in grime, blood and bruises, their faces lined with fear and determination. They were the lucky ones, still alive, but that luck was running thin. Sarah turned her attention back to the tunnel entrance. "We've got to move fast. We'll hit the old subway routes. There's a resistance cell near there. If they haven't been wiped out already, they'll help us." "Resistance," Marquez snorted. "There's barely enough left of us to even count as a resistance. There are still pockets of survivors, and we fight on," Sarah said, her voice fierce, even though doubt lingered in her heart. She had seen enough destruction to make anyone question hope, but not now, not when there was still a chance to fight. "We're not done yet. You hear me? We're not done." They moved through the darkened tunnels, their footsteps echoing off the walls as they navigated the labyrinth beneath the city. The air was damp, thick with the smell of decay. A faint, distant sound of metal scraping against stone reverberated through the passageway. Sarah motioned for them to stop. "Stay alert," she whispered. "We're not the only ones down here." The group huddled together, weapons drawn, as they waited for any sign of danger. The silence was oppressive, stretching on as every passing second made them more vulnerable. There were no comforting sounds of civilization anymore, no distant hum of traffic or chatter from other survivors. The Vothrak had turned everything into a wasteland. Then, just as Sarah was about to motion for them to move forward again, a flash of light pierced the darkness, followed by the unmistakable rumble of Vothrak war machines. They were getting closer. The Vothrak had already begun sweeping the tunnels for survivors. The group was trapped. "Down," Sarah hissed, signaling for everyone to crouch behind a set of old maintenance crates. They could hear the heavy thuds of alien boots growing louder, closer. Sarah's heart raced as she checked the few remaining rounds in her rifle. She would not let them capture her. She would not let her squad become slaves to the Vothrak. Not after everything they had been through. And then, as the sound of the Vothrak grew louder, Sarah's mind raced through their limited options. There was only one chance. If they could ambush the patrol, they might be able to fight their way out. Her voice was steady, despite the tension gripping her chest. "On my mark. We take them out fast and silent." Her team nodded, preparing their weapons. Sarah's eyes locked onto the nearest Vothrak soldier, its silhouette visible in the faint light at the end of the tunnel. With their inhuman speed and strength, it was a gamble, but it was their only shot. Mark. In a coordinated burst of movement, Sarah's squad rose from their hiding spots, launching themselves at the nearest Vothrak soldier. It was a brief but intense skirmish. Sarah's blade found its mark in the throat of one soldier, while Marquez used the distraction to knock another to the ground, finishing him with a shot to the head. The remaining Vothrak soldiers were momentarily stunned, but they quickly recovered, raising their weapons. But it was too late. Sarah and her team were already moving in a blur of deadly precision, exploiting the Vothrak's unguarded moments, their stiff, methodical movements. The aliens had the power, but humans had the edge in adaptability and speed. Within minutes, the last of the Vothrak patrol crumpled to the ground, their bodies unmoving. Silence fell again. Sarah stood over the fallen soldiers, panting, her heart racing. "Get moving," she said, her voice a low growl. "The longer we wait, the more of them will come." The small victory felt like a spark in the darkness, fragile, but enough to reignite the fighting spirit within her. They were still alive, and as long as they breathed, they would keep fighting. The underground tunnel network became their new home, a dark, suffocating refuge beneath the wreckage of the world above. The human resistance had spread across the globe, but it was scattered and fractured. Sarah had heard rumors of cells operating in Europe and South America, but those were whispers, distant hopes, stories passed from survivor to survivor. For now, she and her team were alone. Days bled into one another as they lived off meager rations, scavenged from the ruins above. In the silence of their hidden enclave, they spoke little. Each person carried the weight of a shattered world on their shoulders, and there was no time for rest. They were hunted, constantly on the move, unable to stay in one place for long. The Vothrak had begun a relentless sweep of the planet, purging every trace of humanity. One evening, Sarah gathered her remaining squad around a dimly lit map. The walls of their hideout were lined with crude drawings and hastily scrawled symbols, tactical plans for the next desperate strike against their invaders. Every plan was built on the same fragile foundation: hope. "We've located another resistance cell," Sarah said, her voice low but resolute. "A small group in the remains of what used to be Chicago. If we move quickly, we can link up with them, and maybe, just maybe, form a larger force. But we'll need to act fast. If the Vothrak catch wind of our movement, they'll wipe us all out before we even get there." Marquez, who had been quieter than usual, looked up. Her eyes were hard, focused, but there was a shadow in them. "You really think there's anything left of humanity worth saving?" "I saw it, Sarah. I saw the way they wiped us out. It's not just the cities, it's us. They're hunting us down like vermin. What's left to fight for?" Sarah's eyes flicked toward Marquez, her gaze steady. "We fight because it's who we are. We fight because we have no other choice. This is our world, and it's not theirs. The moment we give up, they win, and we can't let that happen." The silence that followed was thick. They all knew the truth behind Sarah's words. The Vothrak were not just invaders, they were exterminators. The aliens had no interest in enslaving humanity. They wanted to wipe out everything that made Earth unique. The resistance wasn't about regaining lost ground. It was about preserving what remained of humanity's dignity, its soul. That night, as they prepared for the journey to Chicago, Sarah stood in the small corner of their hideout where she kept a picture of her family, a reminder of the life that was stolen from her. Her fingers traced the edges of the photo, worn with time. The faces of her mother, father, and younger brother stared back at her, frozen in happier times. They would never know the world that had become her battlefield. But Sarah refused to let their memory be buried in the dust of their ruins. The journey to the heart of Chicago was grueling. The remnants of the city were nothing but a hollow shell, skyscrapers reduced to jagged skeletons of steel and concrete. Everywhere Sarah looked, the ground was littered with the detritus of human life: burned-out cars, abandoned homes, and remnants of desperate attempts to escape. The alien warships still hovered above, a permanent fixture in the sky, their engines thrumming like a distant heartbeat. As they reached the outskirts of the city, they encountered their first true resistance in days. A small group of Vothrak scouts, patrolling the area in their typical formation, cold, methodical, hunting for any sign of humanity. Sarah and her squad huddled in the shadow of an overturned truck, adrenaline surging through their veins. "3 of them," whispered Sergeant Kim, one of the few remaining members of their team. His voice was tight with tension. "We take them out quietly, or they'll call for backup." Sarah nodded. They had no choice. If they were discovered here, it would be over before they even reached the resistance cell. One by one, the squad moved into position, blending with the ruins. Sarah's heartbeat seemed impossibly loud in her chest as she crept behind the nearest Vothrak, her fingers wrapping around the handle of her knife. The alien was engrossed in scanning the area, its grotesque face turned slightly to the side. With a swift motion, Sarah lunged, driving the blade into the Vothrak's exposed neck. It crumpled to the ground in a wet, sickening thud. The others followed suit, neutralizing the remaining Vothrak in a flash of silent violence. There were no shouts, no struggle, just the quiet efficiency that had become their trademark. Sarah wiped the blood from her knife and turned to face her team. "Let's keep moving. Every moment counts." As they continued their trek toward the heart of Chicago, Sarah couldn't help but feel a strange, fleeting sense of optimism. It wasn't much, just a glimmer of light in an otherwise dark world. But it was something. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, humanity had a chance. And she would make sure that chance was taken. The outskirts of Chicago lay before them, a wasteland of shattered glass and twisted metal. The once bustling city, now a hollow shell of its former self, bore the scars of humanity's failed defense. The alien warships continued to patrol the skies above, casting their long shadows over the city below. It felt as though the very air was heavy with the weight of defeat, suffocating all hope. But in the shadows of the ruin, there was a flicker of something else. Resilience. Sarah led her squad through the desolate streets, each step measured and cautious. The Vothrak patrols were a constant threat, and any mistake could be their last. They reached the remnants of an old military complex on the outskirts of the city, one of the last bastions of human resistance. Its gates were reinforced with scrap metal, and armed sentries stood watch from the high walls, their eyes sharp and vigilant. This was the heart of the Chicago resistance, a ragtag group of survivors who had managed to remain hidden, fighting with everything they had left. "State your business," called out a voice from the gate. Sarah stepped forward, her expression calm, but her mind raced. "We're survivors from the East Coast. We've been trying to find a way to link up with any active resistance cells." The gates creaked as they opened, revealing a group of hardened men and women, each one marked by the brutal reality of the war. Their clothes were ragged, their faces grim. Yet, behind their eyes, Sarah saw something familiar. The same fire that burned within her and her squad. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running across his cheek, stepped forward. His eyes scanned Sarah and her team, measuring them, as though assessing their worth. "I'm Captain Rourke. You're lucky we found you before the Vothrak did. What makes you think we can trust you?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "We've been fighting on our own, but we need to work together. The Vothrak are sweeping across the planet, and if we don't form a united front, we'll all be wiped out. We need to combine forces if we have any hope of surviving." Rourke eyed her for a long moment. He wasn't convinced. Sarah could tell. Trust in these times was scarce, and everyone had their own agenda. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "All right, you can stay for now, but one wrong move, and we'll have no choice but to treat you as enemies. We don't have time for second chances." Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken threat. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Not now. She motioned for her squad to follow Rourke into the camp. The camp was a grim place. Tents and makeshift barricades lined the perimeter, with small groups of fighters moving between them, preparing for the next skirmish. There was a palpable sense of urgency in the air. Everyone knew the Vothrak were closing in, and time was running out. Rourke led Sarah and her squad to a small, dimly lit command center, a bunker carved into the earth beneath the camp. Inside, a series of maps and communications equipment covered the walls. A few resistance fighters were gathered around a table, studying a screen displaying enemy movements. "This is our intelligence," Orcs said, pointing to the map. "The Vothrak are preparing for another large-scale sweep. We're expecting them to move westward in 2 days, and they'll hit this area hard." Sarah leaned in, studying the map. The Vothrak's movements were meticulous, their strategy clear. They were trying to wipe out all resistance cells, one by one, as quickly as possible. It was a terrifyingly efficient plan. "We've got to hit them first," Sarah said, her voice firm. "If we wait, they'll catch us in the open. We need to take out one of their patrols before they can launch their next offensive." Rourke looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "You're suggesting we take the fight to them? We don't have the manpower for a direct assault." "We may not have the numbers, but we have the element of surprise," Sarah countered. "We know their patrol patterns. We can take them out before they even know we're here." For a moment, Rourke said nothing. His gaze shifted to the fighters around him, then back to Sarah. He was clearly weighing the risks, but Sarah saw something shift in his eyes, a flicker of belief. "All right," he said finally. "We'll do it your way. But if this goes south, we're all dead. No one survives a full-on engagement with them." "I know the stakes," Sarah replied. "But we have to try. This is the only shot we've got." The plan was set. Under the cover of darkness, Sarah's squad, along with a small contingent of Orcs men, would ambush a Vothrak patrol. Hit them hard and fast, before the invaders could react. It wasn't just a raid. It was a declaration, a reminder that humanity wasn't going down without a fight. As the hours ticked by, Sarah stood outside the command center, looking up at the distant sky. The stars were barely visible through the thick haze of smoke, but they were there, small, distant, and undeterred, much like humanity. And like those stars, Sarah knew they would burn until the end. "Let's show them what we're made of," she muttered to herself. The night was their ally as Sarah and the resistance fighters prepared for the assault. The air was thick with tension, every person moving in silence, their faces grim but focused. The city of Chicago, though ravaged and broken, had become the backdrop for one of humanity's last hopes. The plan was simple but dangerous. Infiltrate the Vothrak patrol route, neutralize their forces, and make a swift exit. No delays, no mistakes. Sarah stood by the edge of the makeshift camp, her eyes scanning the horizon where the first signs of dawn were beginning to creep across the ruined landscape. The Vothrak patrol was due to pass through this area at any moment. If they could take them out before the aliens had a chance to call for backup, it could delay the invasion just long enough to give other resistance cells a fighting chance. Rourke appeared beside her, his dark eyes reflecting the weight of their plan. "Are you sure this will work?" he asked, his voice a mixture of skepticism and something deeper, fear. "We don't have another choice," Sarah said, her voice steady. "If we don't disrupt their momentum now, they'll be at our doorstep before we know it. They're relentless, but so are we." Rourke let out a long breath, nodding. "I hope you're right. But if this goes wrong, we'll be fighting for our lives out there." "We will be," Sarah affirmed, "but I'll make sure we get through it." The resistance fighters were ready. Kim, Marquez, and the others stood at attention, their weapons checked and rechecked, eyes filled with determination. Each one of them had experienced the horrors of the Vothrak invasion firsthand, and there was no question about what they stood to lose. At the sound of Rourke's signal, the group moved into position. Sarah took point, her footsteps light but purposeful as she led them toward the edge of the city. The Vothrak patrol was expected to arrive soon, and every second counted. The streets were eerily quiet as they moved, the distant hum of Vothrak warships overhead the only sound. The wreckage of human civilization lay all around them, overturned cars, burnt-out buildings, and the remnants of what had once been vibrant neighborhoods. The city had fallen, but not without a fight. There were still signs of resistance everywhere, even if it was just graffiti scrawled on walls, declaring humanity's refusal to submit. They reached the outskirts of their ambush point, just as the first Vothrak patrol rounded a corner. The aliens, heavily armored and armed with energy rifles, moved in a tight formation. They were methodical, scanning the area for any sign of trouble. Their leader, a towering creature with reptilian features and a cybernetic arm, barked orders in a guttural language. Sarah's heart raced. She motioned for her squad to take cover behind the rubble. The next few minutes would determine everything. "Stay sharp," Sarah whispered. "On my mark." The seconds stretched into eternity. Sarah's eyes locked onto the patrol, noting every detail, the way they moved, the way they communicated, and the gaps in their formation. The Vothrak were powerful, but they were predictable. That predictability was humanity's advantage. "Now," Sarah ordered. With a coordinated burst of speed, her squad erupted from their hiding places, closing the distance between them and the patrol in a matter of seconds. Marcus took out the rear guard with a single shot, while Kim and Rourke neutralized the forward scouts. Sarah charged directly at the leader, her combat knife drawn. The Vothrak leader turned just in time to meet Sarah's assault. The alien raised its energy rifle, but Sarah was faster. She dove beneath its line of fire, rolling to her feet in one fluid motion. Before the leader could react, she drove her blade into the soft spot beneath its armored neck, the knife sinking deep into its flesh. The Vothrak let out a horrific screech, its body jerking violently before collapsing to the ground. The rest of the patrol scrambled, their surprise at the ambush quickly turning into fury. But it was too late. The element of surprise was on humanity's side, and Sarah's squad moved with brutal efficiency. Kim threw a grenade, sending 2 Vothrak soldiers flying as the blast tore through their ranks. Marquise covered their flanks, her rifle spitting fire as she picked off any Vothrak trying to regroup. Within moments, the ambush was over. The remaining Vothrak were either dead or incapacitated, their bodies strewn across the debris-littered street. Panting, Sarah scanned the area, her mind racing through the next steps. "We move fast," she said, her voice sharp. "We can't afford to stay here." Rourke nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "That was some damn good work, Commander. I think you've earned some trust from my people." But Sarah wasn't focused on praise. She was already looking ahead. The Vothrak would retaliate soon, and they needed to get back to the resistance camp before reinforcements arrived. Every minute spent in the open was a minute closer to death. As the squad quickly retreated, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they had just won a small battle in a much larger war. The Vothrak were not invincible. They could be beaten. They could be bled. But the true test lay ahead. This victory was a message, not just to the Vothrak, but to humanity itself. They would not go quietly into the dark. And Sarah Kane, leader of a handful of survivors, would make sure of it. The Vothrak leader's body was left behind in the street, a grim testament to humanity's resolve. But Sarah didn't have the luxury of celebration. The patrol they'd taken down was just a small piece of a much larger machine, one that was still very much operational and hell-bent on eradicating the human race. Their victory, though significant, was fleeting. The true challenge was what came next. Sarah's squad, along with Rourke and his fighters, made their way back to the resistance camp under the cover of darkness. As they approached, Sarah noticed the grim expressions on their faces, their bodies tense, their movements faster. Something was wrong. "We've got trouble," Rourke said quietly as he stepped up beside her. "The Vothrak are aware of the ambush. They've sent reinforcements, and they're heading this way." "How long do we have?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. "Not long," Rourke replied. "Maybe an hour, if we're lucky." The realization hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. The small victory had bought them time, but not nearly enough. The Vothrak were relentless, and if they moved quickly, they could wipe out everything they had worked for. "Get everyone to the tunnels," Sarah ordered, her voice sharp. "We'll move out before they reach us. Rourke, gather your people. I'll prepare the defense." Sarah turned to her team, her eyes scanning each face. Kim, Marquez, and the others. They knew what needed to be done. There would be no time for sentiment, no time for second-guessing. Every one of them was ready for what lay ahead, even if they didn't fully understand the cost. They moved quickly, gathering supplies, packing up whatever they could carry. The air around them was thick with the sense of impending doom. The Vothrak's approach felt like a storm, a firestorm, ready to burn everything in its path. The shadows of their alien warships loomed overhead, casting long, menacing silhouettes over the city. The underground tunnels had been the Resistance's lifeline for months, and now they were their only escape route. The plan was simple: move quickly through the tunnels, regroup at a secondary base deeper in the city, and then decide on their next move. But Sarah knew they had no real plan beyond survival. Every day was a fight to stay alive, and there were no guarantees. As they reached the entrance to the tunnels, a distant rumble shook the ground, followed by the unmistakable sound of Vothrak weapons discharging. The aliens had arrived. The first wave of their reinforcements had breached the outer defenses. "Move! Now!" Sarah shouted, pushing her squad into the dark passageway. They ran as fast as they could, their footsteps echoing in the claustrophobic tunnel. The sound of gunfire grew louder behind them, and Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She stole a glance over her shoulder, seeing the flicker of explosions illuminating the night sky. They were being chased, and the Vothrak were not going to let them escape easily. "We can't outrun them forever," Markid shouted, gasping for breath. "We don't need to outrun them," Sarah replied, her voice cold with resolve. "We just need to make sure they pay for every inch they take." Ahead, Rourke had already positioned a group of resistance fighters to hold the rear. They'd set up a makeshift barricade in the tunnel, a narrow choke point where they could slow the Vothrak down, buy themselves precious moments to get ahead. "We'll give you 5 minutes, Sarah," Rourke called out as he waved them forward. "That's all we've got." The group moved past the barricade, but Sarah knew it would only delay the inevitable. The Vothrak were fast, and their technology was far superior. No matter how hard they fought, there was only so much they could do to stand in their way. The deeper they went into the tunnels, the more surreal the world around them seemed. The air grew colder, and the walls of the underground passages were covered in ancient graffiti, the remnants of a forgotten world. In a strange way, it reminded Sarah of the life they had lost, the life before the war, before the invasion. It seemed so distant now, like a dream that had been smothered by fire and blood. "How long until we reach the secondary base?" Kim asked, pulling Sarah from her thoughts. "About 30 minutes, Sarah answered, though she wasn't sure herself. The tunnels twisted and turned in ways that were hard to track, but she knew they couldn't afford to stop for long. Not now. But as they rounded a corner, they heard a noise ahead, a low, rumbling sound. It wasn't the distant echo of collapsing buildings or the low hum of alien warships. This was something else, something closer. Sarah held up a hand, signaling for everyone to stop. "Get down," she whispered urgently. The sound grew louder, and suddenly, the dim light ahead illuminated the tunnel. At first, it looked like a vehicle, an enormous machine rumbling toward them. But then Sarah realized the truth. It wasn't a vehicle. It was a Vothrak war machine, a massive armored behemoth designed to crush anything in its path, and it was heading straight toward them. "Move, move, move," Sarah shouted, her voice frantic. The squad turned and sprinted down the tunnel, but the war machine was gaining on them fast. With its heavy treads and monstrous frame, it was almost impossible to escape, and just as Sarah thought they might have a chance to make it to the next junction, she heard a voice, Marquez, shouting behind her. "Sarah, it's too late." The rumbling of the Vothrak war machine grew deafening as it closed in on them. Its massive treads churned the earth beneath it, sending vibrations through the tunnels that felt like tremors from a collapsing world. Sarah's heart raced. There was no time. The path ahead was blocked, and the only option was to turn and fight. But against something that large, they were no more than ants. Get to the side. Sarah barked. Now, take cover. Her voice was barely heard over the grinding noise of the war machine. The squad split into two groups, diving for cover behind crumbling support beams and old tunnel equipment. The walls of the underground passage were cracked, the ceiling low, and it was hard to tell where the machine would strike first. It was a deadly game of hide and seek. Kim's voice crackled through her earpiece. Sarah, that thing's too big to stop with just our weapons. We need a plan. I know, Sarah answered through gritted teeth. She turned to Rourke, who had taken position beside her. His eyes were wide, focused. He knew this would be their last stand if they didn't figure out something fast. Rourke's grip tightened around his rifle. The machine's got weak points, its joints, its power core. If we hit those, we might have a chance. Where's the best place to hit it? Sarah asked, already formulating a plan. Right under its front hatch. It's vulnerable there, but we'll need explosives to penetrate the armor. And there's no way we can get close without getting slaughtered. A fire lit in Sarah's chest. They couldn't back down now, not after everything they had endured. If this was their last chance, they had to take it. Marquez, Sarah called. How much explosives do we have? Marquez was crouched low behind an old barrel, her rifle ready but clearly thinking hard. Enough for a charge, but it's going to be a risk. We're talking about a direct hit. If we miss, it's over. Sarah nodded. Then we make sure we don't miss. She turned to the others, her mind focused on the moment ahead. Kim, Rourke, you two distract the machine. Make sure it doesn't see us coming. I'll get to the front hatch with Marquez. We plant the charge, and we make sure it detonates. Understood. Each of them nodded, their expressions grim. There was no second chance. No retreat. This was it. The squad moved into position. Rourke and Kim took a spot a few meters down the tunnel, where they had a clear line of sight to the war machine. Rourke raised his rifle and took a deep breath. On your mark. Sarah gave a quick nod and motioned for Marquez. The two of them darted forward, staying low to the ground as the monstrous machine rolled closer. Every step felt like it might be their last. The air was thick with tension, the sound of their heartbeats in their ears. The machine's lights glinted as it approached, its alien technology whirring ominously. At the right moment, Rourke and Kim opened fire. The machine's attention snapped to them, its sensors detecting the gunfire as they hoped. It began to turn toward the noise, its massive turret rotating with terrifying precision. It was too far away to engage, but it was enough of a distraction. The war machine fired its blaster into the tunnel walls, sending sparks flying. The ground shook as debris rained down around Sarah and Marquez. We've got to move faster, Sarah shouted, pushing Marquez ahead. The two sprinted toward the front of the machine, where its hatch glowed faintly. They were just feet away when the war machine's blasters fired again, narrowly missing them as the shockwave from the blast threw them both to the ground. Get up, Sarah yelled, pulling herself to her feet. We're so close. They reached the hatch, Marquez already setting up the explosive charge. The timer was set, just 5 seconds. Sarah's hand trembled as she glanced over her shoulder. The Vothrak war machine was turning back toward them, its turret snapping into place. Almost there, Marquez muttered, sweat pouring down her face. Just a little longer. With a deafening roar, the war machine fired again, a blast so close it singed the edges of Sarah's coat. Marquez placed the last trigger on the explosive and pushed Sarah down. Get back. Now. Sarah didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed Marquez's arm and pulled her back as the blast detonated. The tunnel filled with a massive explosion that sent shockwaves through the earth. A burst of heat and light flooded the dark passage as the war machine's front hatch crumpled under the force of the explosion, exposing its innards. The ground trembled violently. Sarah was thrown against the tunnel wall, her head spinning. The roar of the explosion echoed in her ears, drowning out everything else. When the smoke cleared, she forced herself to stand, her legs shaky but steady. She turned back to look, praying the blast had done the job. The war machine was no more than a smoking, charred wreck. Its massive body lay crumpled in the tunnel, its lights flickering weakly, signaling its failure. "We did it," Marcus whispered, her voice raw with disbelief. But Sarah's victory was short-lived. As the dust settled, a distant rumble reached their ears. The unmistakable sound of more Vothrek reinforcements, this time not in the form of a single war machine, but an entire battalion. "We've bought ourselves some time," Sarah said, "but it's not over. We need to move, and we need to move fast." She turned to Rourke and the others, who were cautiously approaching. The looks on their faces were a mixture of relief and dread. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And Sarah knew that no matter how many machines they destroyed, no matter how many battles they fought, there would be no real victory until the Vothrek were driven off Earth, once and for all. The Vothrek war machine lay smoldering in the tunnel, its massive form reduced to a twisted carcass. Sarah stood, breathing heavily, staring at the wreckage as the acrid smell of burning metal filled the air. The victory was undeniable, but the cost was already becoming evident. The Vothrek would come in greater numbers, their response to the destruction inevitable. Time was no longer on their side. "Get moving," Sarah ordered, her voice unwavering despite the exhaustion weighing on her. "We need to keep moving or this will all be for nothing." The squad didn't hesitate. They moved quickly, retracing their steps through the tunnels, their minds already shifting to the next task at hand. They had survived the ambush, defeated the war machine, but the real battle, getting the resistance to safety, had just begun. Rourke's voice came through her earpiece. "I've sent a team to scout the outer tunnels. It's clear for now, but I can't guarantee how long that'll last." "Good," Sarah replied. "We'll need a route out of here. Make sure everyone's ready to move when we get there." They continued on in tense silence, the echoes of their footsteps ringing through the subterranean halls. The tunnel walls seemed to press in on them, as if the very earth was closing in to trap them. The remnants of the old world were all around them, rusted pipes, shattered concrete, and forgotten signs of a society that once thrived. Now, all of it seemed like an ancient ruin, lost to history in the blink of an eye. Kim's voice broke through the quiet. "Sarah, are you sure about this? The Vothrek will track us. They'll keep hunting us until we're all dead." Sarah paused, turning to meet Kim's gaze. She could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear that had haunted each of them since the invasion. But Sarah had seen something else, something that burned brighter than fear. It was determination. That was what had kept them alive this long. "We don't have a choice," Sarah said, her voice hard. "If we wait here, they'll find us. If we stay in these tunnels, we're dead. We need to get to the surface, get out of the city. The resistance cells are counting on us." Kim nodded, though the unease in her expression remained. "What's the plan when we get out?" "We fight," Sarah said flatly. "We make a stand. We do whatever it takes to buy time for the others. But first, we need to get out." As they moved deeper into the underground labyrinth, the sounds of the battle above them began to fade. The surface world felt far away now, so distant that Sarah almost questioned if it was real. The people they had once been, the world they had known, seemed like a dream that was slipping through her fingers. They had come so far, fought so hard, and yet it felt like the Vothrek were always a step ahead, always closing in. Soon, they reached a narrow opening, a forgotten maintenance hatch that led upward to the surface. The air here felt fresher, less stale than the tunnels they had just traversed. But that fresh air carried a weight, an almost suffocating sense of finality. Rourke's team was already waiting at the top, crouched low, weapons ready. "The coast is clear," Rourke whispered. "For now." Sarah gestured for the squad to move. They climbed up through the hatch, emerging into the daylight. The city of Chicago lay before them in ruin, a landscape of twisted metal and broken glass. The war had scared the Earth itself. What was once a proud city had become a war zone, a battleground where humanity's last hope hung in the balance. "We're not safe here," Marcus said, scanning the skyline for any signs of movement. "The Vothrak will send more reinforcements soon. They won't leave us alone." "Then we give them a fight they'll never forget," Sarah said, her gaze hardening. "We need to find the others, gather the resistance, and make a final stand." They moved cautiously, staying out of sight of the Vothrak warships that hovered in the sky above. The city was eerily quiet now, save for the occasional explosion or distant rumble. It was as if the world itself had stopped, holding its breath. As they moved through the abandoned streets, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this might be their last walk through this world. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every noise a warning. The weight of their task, the responsibility of leading the last remnants of humanity, felt heavier than ever. "Commander," Kim said quietly, "there's something you should see." Sarah turned to see Kim pointing toward a nearby building, its facade shattered by the shockwaves of previous battles. The building was a former military outpost, and the flag of the resistance had been raised high. It was a symbol of defiance, a beacon that humanity had not given up. But as Sarah's eyes scanned the area, her heart sank. She saw the signs of a struggle, blood stains on the ground, overturned barricades, and discarded weapons. The outpost had been abandoned in a hurry. "What happened here?" Sarah asked, dread creeping into her voice. "They've been pushed back," Rourke said, his voice grim. "The Vothrak are moving in on every cell. They know we're still here. They're closing in." The harsh reality hit Sarah. The resistance was losing ground, fast. They had one shot at making a difference, but that shot was slipping away. If they couldn't rally enough fighters, if they couldn't hold their ground long enough, the Vothrak would wipe them out, and humanity's last hope would vanish with them. "We can't give up," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear that threatened to overtake her. "This city, this planet, it's our home. We fight for it. We fight until the last of us falls." The squad stood in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling over them. They had no illusions left. This was their last stand. There was no turning back. "Let's finish this," Marcus said, her voice unwavering. With that, they moved forward, ready to face whatever came next. They had fought to survive. Now, they would fight to reclaim their world. The wind had picked up as they moved through the wreckage of Chicago, the last remnants of a once thriving metropolis, now nothing more than a haunting graveyard of broken steel and shattered glass. The streets were eerily silent, save for the distant hum of Vothrak warships scanning the sky, their searchlights sweeping over the ruins. The oppressive weight of the world pressing down on Sarah and her squad was almost unbearable. They had reached the outskirts of what had once been a major resistance stronghold, and what they found there confirmed their worst fears. The outpost was abandoned. It had been raided, the defenders either slaughtered or driven back into the shadows. The Vothrak were closing in on every position, their relentless advance threatening to engulf humanity's last remaining forces. Sarah stopped at the edge of the ruined building, surveying the desolation before her. The flag of the resistance had been torn to shreds, fluttering weakly in the wind, a symbol of defiance that now seemed like a cruel reminder of what they had lost. "We've got to gather the survivors," Rourke said, his voice low but urgent. "If there's anyone left, we find them. We regroup, hold this position as long as we can. We won't make it if we don't." "I know," Sarah replied, her eyes scanning the horizon. "But we don't have much time. The Vothrak know we're here. This is their last push." The weight of those words hung heavy in the air. There was no pretending anymore. The Vothrak weren't just invading. They were cleansing. Every resistance cell, every last bastion of human hope, was being wiped off the map. Their only choice now was to make their stand here, whether they liked it or not. "Kim, Marquez, you two head east. Check the old fire station. We need to know if any of the civilians or fighters have taken shelter there, Sarah instructed, her voice calm but steady. Got it, Kim said. She looked back at Sarah, her expression hardening with resolve. We'll be quick. Be careful, Sarah warned as they moved off, her eyes following them until they disappeared into the shadows. She turned to Rourke and the others. Everyone else, we start fortifying. Barricades, traps. We hold this ground or die trying. The others moved into action immediately. They had done this countless times before. Reinforced positions, set up defenses, made the impossible seem like a sliver of hope. But Sarah knew this time was different. They weren't just buying time anymore. They were holding the line for the future of humanity. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the battlefield, Sarah took a moment to catch her breath. Her eyes wandered to the sky, watching the Vothrak warships. They hovered like vultures, waiting for the moment to descend and finish the job. Rourke, Sarah said softly, her voice betraying a tinge of uncertainty for the first time in a long while. How much longer can we keep this up? Even if we hold them back here, how many more times can we keep doing this? How many more times can we make the impossible seem possible? Rourke looked at her, his jaw set in a firm line. We make it last as long as we can, because if we don't, they'll wipe out the rest. If we fall, it's over for everyone. His words were simple, yet powerful. It was the harsh truth that no one could deny. Their fight wasn't just for survival. It was for the future of their children, their people, and everything they had fought for up until this point. Sarah squared her shoulders and turned to the others, her resolve hardening like steel. We don't fight for today. We fight for tomorrow. The moment those words left her lips, the ground trembled. Sarah's heart sank. The Vothrak were coming. She could hear their war machines in the distance, the sound of their engines growing louder, filling the air with a sense of impending doom. Prepare yourselves, Sarah ordered, voice steady despite the chaos inside her. This is it. We hold until the last man. They took their positions, spreading out across the fortified building, setting up makeshift barricades and reinforcing weak spots. Sarah joined them, her mind focused solely on the battle ahead. They would give everything. And if they fell, they would fall together, as the last human warriors to stand against the alien threat. The distant hum of the Vothrak machines became deafening, until, at last, the first of them appeared over the horizon. A massive hulking warship, its engines blazing bright against the setting sun. The enemy was here. The final battle had begun. Sarah's pulse quickened as she watched the warship's silhouette cut through the sky. There was no turning back now. Get ready, Sarah whispered to herself, her fingers wrapped around her rifle, her breath steadying. This wasn't just about fighting for survival. This was a fight for everything humanity had ever been. For the generations that had come before, and for the ones that might never come unless they won. The Vothrak ship hovered just above the ground, a mechanical behemoth ready to unleash hell. Then, without warning, it opened fire. The first blast hit the barricades, sending debris flying and shaking the earth beneath them. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she dove behind cover. But there was no fear now, no hesitation. She had led them this far. They had fought through every impossible situation, and now they would fight one final time. The battle had begun.